With that being said, we're going to ask you to hold your questions to the end after we give the talk. Probably we won't take more than 30 minutes, so there will be plenty of time for FAQs. And then once Marilyn and I have spoken, we will stop the recording, and that way, you know, you can go ahead and feel free to ask your questions. They won't be shared on the website. Marilyn, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and make any introductions or anything else you'd like to share? Oh, I can't hear you, Marilyn. Okay. While Marilyn's doing that, I just want to let you know and share with you, there is a specific talk at 1 p.m. and that talk, it will go into detail about eligibility and also the budget. So the 1 p.m. talk, it's a different Zoom link. I will share that in the chat and I'll have a couple of examples. And I think I'll even quiz you to determine if you think, you know, the example is somebody that's eligible or not eligible. And I'll go into detail about some budgets, some example budgets, what a budget with an NC might look like, or brain award. So that information will be available, or that webinar will be available at 1 p.m. And I'm also going to start out by maybe putting the link for that in the chat. So you have that.
And I'll just, hopefully my microphone is working now. Hi, everybody. My name is Marilyn Morhoon. I've been an SRO running the R35s for a number of years. It's a real joy, I have to say, to run this review panel, because the level of excellence of all of the applicants and of the reviewers is pretty amazing. So I really look forward to all of your applications, and you'll receive an email from me once all the applications have been received, which will probably be early August. And feel free to reach out anytime and give me a ring. So with that, I'll leave it the rest to when we give the talk.
Okay, so before I get started, I'm very curious to hear. So I see almost 230 participants. I'm just curious to know, the email went to investigators as well as institutional officials. Maybe a raise of hands as to who is an investigator thinking of applying. Wonderful, nice to see you. Thinking of applying this year, or wow, all those hands, this is so exciting. Wonderful, wonderful to see all of you. That's very exciting. Of course, the FOA is for 3 years. You can apply this year. You can be considering applying for next year or the year after. And I'm also curious to know if we have some institutional officials on the call today that want to listen to the webinar and take this information to the investigators at their institution. Maybe a raise of a celebration or something different, so I can kind of get a sense of who's on the call today. Oh, there we go. Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It's great to see so many smiling and faces that are very excited about the science that we do at NINDS. So without delay, I will get started. I will be sharing my screen. I want to share my talk. Okay, so what I'm doing here, I'm not going to put this in presentation mode. The reason for that is it makes it very hard for me to see what's going on with the chat or other things kind of disappear. So if you feel like you're not quite seeing the presentation, just let me know, but I think this should work. Is this okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so what we are going to cover today, and this again is a pretty high level overview. So it's the overview and benefits of the R35, the Research Program Award. And I emphasize program because that's exactly what it is. It's not just a project, it really is an award or a program where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Okay, so it's not your typical R01, the R35 is a program. I'm going to briefly go over who is eligible. I'll provide the budget guidance that you'll see in the FOA. Dr. Morhoon, Marilyn, she will speak to the review. We'll give you some next steps and we will have time for questions and answers. So what is the R35? As you're probably aware, that's why you've come to the webinar. It's not just your typical R01. It is a unique program for NINDS that helps investigators make meaningful contributions to neuroscience by providing greater funding stability, flexibility, and support for overall research projects without the constraint of specific aims. It's intended to support most of your NINDS mission relevant research by providing that stable funding for up to 8 years. Now, there are some exceptions to the research that is not rolled into the R35. That's in the FOA, and I can talk about that in the second webinar, 1 p.m. Eastern. Your budget will be commensurate with your 4-year NINDS funding average. So the R35, this program actually has a minimum. It has a floor of $350,000 of funding. And it does also have a cap. It has a cap of $750,000. That is direct costs per year. There is an administrative checkpoint after the 5th year, and that's because it's longer than the typical NIH grant. So we do have a checkpoint. And at that point, we just determine if there are any major red flags. Otherwise, we approve you to continue for years 6 through 8. After the 5-year checkpoint, there is an opportunity to request a budget increase, and the details pertaining to that are outlined in the FOA. And feel free to put questions in the chat if you're thinking of them now, and I'll make sure to read them once Marilyn and I are done presenting. So what are the eligibility criteria? Well, of course, it is an NINDS award, so the research does need to be within the mission of NINDS. You must have at least one of the following types of active NINDS grants within each of the past 5 consecutive years. So the past 5 years is inclusive of the government fiscal 18, 19, 20, 2021, and 2022 at the time of application. I basically look to see if you had your 2022 funding by September, essentially, September 1. So these activities are the R00, the R01, the multi-year funded R01, which is known as the RF1, the Javits Award, known as the R37, a Bridge Award, known as the R56, a DP1 or a DP2. A few of you, either now or in future years, will have an active R35, and in your 7th or 8th year, you are encouraged to apply for a new R35 award. A lot of people, because of COVID, might have a year in NCE. That is perfectly acceptable to be a no-cost extension. Some investigators have more than 1 year in NCE. We recognize COVID has contributed to that, so please provide a justification, and we will also consider more than 1 year in NCE with some justification. So who should apply? Again, this is not your typical R01. It's a different type of program. So some things to think about. NINDS is committed to supporting investigators across a broad spectrum of career stages and lab sizes. We place a significant value on high quality mentorship and inclusive training environments. As scientific progress is best accelerated by leveraging a variety of experiences and perspectives, we encourage eligible women and individuals from diverse backgrounds to apply. Based on the requirements of the R35, investigators should determine if this research program is the best fit for their research goals. So you really want to think about your timeline, what projects you currently have. Is it better to apply now? Maybe you're not at your strongest point, but you'll get the feedback. Maybe you want to apply in a year from now when you're coming in potentially with a larger potential budget. So those are some things to consider. If you're an institutional official, those are some things also you want to look at. What does the investigator have in hand? What is the ideal timing? It does require, now keep in mind, this is an 8-year program. It's a unique program. So this is another thing you do want to think about. It does require a minimum 50% effort, 50% effort minimum for the duration of the award. Okay, so what the award might look like if you have one R01, you're early in your career or something along those lines, you have that one modular R01, non-modular R01, maybe you have about $218,000 in the recent past. So you'd actually come in for at the floor of $350,000, and that would be the 8-year award. If you have 2 non-modular R01s, maybe you're coming in for around $520,000 for 8 years. So those are some things to keep in mind as you're putting your application together and thinking about whether this is the right fit for you. So how do you calculate your R35 budget? So the requested research program award budget must be commensurate with your recent level of NINDS support. Keep in mind the cap is $750,000 direct cost per year. We do have some examples in our FAQs, so be sure to take a look at that. You calculate your level of support by using your average direct costs for the 4 most recent fiscal years. So remember, you have to have 5 years to be eligible, but we're looking at 4 years of your budget. Those 4 years have to be consecutive. And basically we are letting you choose. You can choose 2018 to 2021, or you can choose 2019 to 2022, whichever is greater. And you can calculate out both and choose the one that is higher. If your 4-year average is less than $350,000, you've just had that one R01 at $218,000, for example, for 5 years, you will be bumped up to the minimum of $350,000. Please be sure to read the FOA sections for eligibility and budget details closely and follow those. Also, we've put a lot of information on our website. You can visit the FAQs. You will find a budget template there, and more details, specific details, for example, multi-component awards, PO1s, things along those lines, and PI awards that will help you in calculating your R35 budget. We also have a how-to video that shows you how to check your eligibility and funding on NIH Reporter. And one of the reasons why I recommend going to NIH Reporter is that you are now pulling your grant information from the same database that we at NINDS is pulling the information from. So we pull it from Impact 2, and NIH Reporter is also pulling the information from Impact 2. And that way you'll be confident that the year for which you're allocating your funding is the same year we have in our system. So in summary, some of the benefits of the R35 is that it provides stable funding of $350,000 minimum to $750,000 maximum per year for up to 8 years. It allows you to conduct long-term rewarding research that is not tied to specific aims. It provides you the flexibility to pivot as needed to emerging and timely topics. It supports your research by freeing up time you would otherwise spend applying for multiple grants. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Morhoon, and I'm going to let her go over the review components of the R35. Marilyn, I'll forward your slides for you.
Yeah, if you could do the slides, that'd be great. Run them from your machine. So Hello, everybody. I'm seeing lots of questions about budget stuff in the chat, and I'm sure Alyssa will tell you, but anything we don't get to here, we will be adding to the FAQs that we'll post online on the webpage. So just that you guys know, an R35 review is not like a standard R01 peer review. So when you have a standard R01 peer review, the focus is really very closely on the specific aims and whether the whole package of the application supports completing those specific aims. And as such, very often the approach criteria is kind of the score driver for the overall impact score that you receive on that R01. So it's very, very different with the R35 because here the track record of the PI as well as the impact of the future potential impact of the research is really important. And so an example of this is that you will be asked to include a list of your mentoring and training background that you've done at your institution or at different scientific conferences or even internationally. And this is really important, and the reviewers take a good close look as to how much you're giving back to the community in terms of what you're providing as along with the great research that you're doing. The other piece of it is the research program taken all together. And so it's not, we really push the reviewers to have a look at the track record of the PI. So can you forward to the next slide? So a couple of things to kind of think about. And when you look at the funding announcement, there's a couple places that I'm going to direct your attention. So if you want to know how I am going to advise the reviewers to assess the applications, if you go to section 5 of the funding announcement, it's going to have everything there for what we term in terms of the information we provide reviewers as to what they need to consider for criteria and considerations. And as such, section 4 of the funding announcement is also very important because section 4 tells you what you as an applicant need to include in your application for it to be deemed complete and compliant and responsive. So those two sections of the funding announcement are really important, but my piece is review, so I really want to draw your attention to section 5 of the funding announcement. And so from this, you can see that what we're asking reviewers to look at is the contributions made by the PI commensurate with their career stage. And we do tell reviewers to think about career stage. The potential for the research impact to continue at the same level over the course of the RPA, and the suitability of this mechanism in terms of its flexibility and how it might facilitate time and freedom for the PI to advance their research program. So it's really kind of more of a big package. Next slide. So the other thing that's very unique about the R35 is that you're bringing a lot of different research strands together. Sometimes those strands are very closely interwoven. Sometimes those strands are a little bit more loosely woven together. And you only have a 6-page research plan to do this in. So it's really important within those 6 pages that you describe the vision that you have for the research, kind of the framework for how you see the research going forward, different strategies you might have for advancing or keeping the research going over the next few years. But at the same time, you're not provided a detailed experimental plan. There's no room for that. So we tell the reviewers very closely that they should not expect R01 level detail. We're really looking for a very big picture review of whether this research program is going to continue going forward and the PI can continue to make major impacts in their field. Next slide. So a couple of things, again, that I want to draw your attention to, and this is what I mentioned before in terms of what's important in section 4. We ask for 3 pieces of information, 2 pieces for most of you. The first thing is a bibliography from the past 5 years. This does feel a little bit duplicative of what you provide in your biosketch, but the reason we ask specifically for a biosketch from the past 5 years is that it's a way to equal the playing field across career stages. Because what we want reviewers to look at is where the research has been more recently and what is the direction of the research, or the, where is it projecting to? Is it, on an upward trajectory? Is it kind of flat? Is it on a downward trajectory? And having this bibliography from the past 5 years gives reviewers that kind of basis to compare somebody who's been doing research for 35 years versus somebody who's maybe only been doing research for 10 to 15 years. The other piece that's very, very important that you include is your mentoring, service, and inclusion. So this is where you have an opportunity to address the contributions you make to, science as a whole in terms of bringing new people into doing research. Where have your trainees ended up? Have you been inclusive in your training projects? Have you been bringing in diverse perspectives to your research program? Finally, if you are doing a clinical trial or proposing a new clinical trial, because there's only a 6-page research plan, it's really important that we give the reviewers a little bit of extra information regarding that clinical trial. So you are allowed an additional 6 pages to provide a clinical trial synopsis. So this is really important. It's very difficult for reviewers, especially when new clinical trials are being proposed. So for instance, perhaps somebody's had a translational research program. They have a potential treatment very close to, stage 1 clinical trials, but they're not quite there yet. And that clinical trial has not necessarily been reviewed. This is the opportunity for that to be peer reviewed. So this clinical trial synopsis is very, very important to include. And you should not include it if you are not proposing a clinical trial. As I said, anything that you see in section 4 that NINDS is asking for gives you a very good pointer for what the reviewers will be looking at and what we direct them to during the review process. Next slide. So now back to Alyssa, thanks.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay now?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, excellent. So the next step is to make sure you review the funding opportunity announcement. You can talk with your program director, reach out to, because your program director that you might have on your active award would be different than myself for the R35. So you can talk to your program director or myself to see if this is the right program for you. We encourage you to visit the NINDS R35 FAQs to learn more and determine the budget you would be eligible to apply for. And also review your current research portfolio and begin your application if this is the right fit for you. So the applications are due July 13th, 2022. You can take a look at the FOA if you feel like now's not the right time. You can apply in 2023 or in 2024. I do have a couple of hyperlinks that I think I'm going to put in the chat right now and make sure you have that information. And then Marilyn, I think you started recording. So what we can do is we can stop the recording and I can go through some of the questions in the chat, and then we will open the microphones to ask questions if you did not put